I'm going to tell you all a little story. It all starts with an idea, a simple solution to a common problem. And after much due diligence and research and investigation into this problem and planning, you realize that the solution to this problem could be an app, your app. And all you have to do is build it. So how do you get from a great idea, an innovative solution, to launching an app? Well, it's a long journey. It's thrilling, it's exciting, it's treacherous, and the landscape is constantly changing before your eyes. This is a journey I've taken many times in my career. I'm the CEO of an app development company that helps founders make smart decisions about how to develop and launch new software. I started my career as a web developer back when MySpace was the big thing. I wanted to have the most customized MySpace page, and the way that you did that was you would just throw some HTML and CSS code into your little bio box, and you could take the whole thing over and do whatever you want with it. And so from there, I learned more about web development, and I started freelancing pretty much right out of high school, building apps or building websites for anyone who needed it. And after a few years building websites, I started learning about this new thing that the web was able to do, which is build applications, which are a little bit different than websites. And that websites are usually used to tell a story about a company or a product and explain what it's all about, maybe sell something, whereas the application is the product itself. And so I got really excited about that. I got really excited about system architecture and really product development as a whole. And so these days, I tend to lead the technical journey for founders who are looking to launch a new app, or for businesses who have been down this path before, have fallen into some traps, and are looking for a better way. And so as I said, the journey from idea to launch is long and complex, but we can break it down into 3 steps. The first being the idea stage. And this is really where you come up with your solution to this problem, get to know the problem really well. The next stage is the development stage. This is where you build it. This is where my expertise lies, in going from idea and technically figuring out how we make it a reality. And then finally, launch, where you release your creation to the world. We're going to focus primarily on the development stage, but we'll get started with a brief summary of what the idea stage looks like, because it is arguably the most important stage of this process. It's all about discovery. So like I said, this is where you hone your solution and really figure out what you're doing. And this stage is a prerequisite to being successful in the following 2 stages, in the development stage and in the launch stage. You may have heard, if you've seen the movie Field of Dreams, if you build it, they will come. I've learned the hard way in software development that's not true at all. Because I build lots of really cool things that no one ever uses. So what are you trying to get out of the idea stage? Really, you need to build your business model. You need to prove your bottom line. You need to make sure that you can go from pre-revenue to post-revenue to sustainable business. You need to find product market fit. Is there really an opportunity out there? Do people really need your solution? Does it need to be built, and should you be the one who's building it? Ideally, you can find customers in this stage. So before you build your product, it's a little counterintuitive, you should find customers that are asking for it. Also in this stage, it would be great if you could create a website about the product that you're building and provide people a way to find out more. I'm often approached by founders who are ready to build their app, and they don't have a website yet. And so I tell them, you need to have a website first, because you build this cool thing, people are going to land on your login page, and they're not going to know what to do. So you need to define your MVP. And at this stage, it might not be software. It's really, MVP stands for minimum viable product in the tech world. And really, it means what is the least you can do or build to solve the needs of your target customer or end user. And then maybe a co-founder. Wouldn't it be great if in this stage you could come out of the stage with someone else who believes enough in your idea to invest in it with you? That's really going to help you be more successful. And then finally, a prototype. So a prototype is kind of a rigged together version of what your product will be. And there's different reasons for building a prototype. You might build a prototype for user testing. So you build an example of like, okay, here's what it's going to do. You show it to people, you get their feedback. Maybe you need to make changes. Another reason to build a prototype is that maybe you're raising money. And you need to show investors what this thing is going to look like so that they know what you're raising money to do. The third reason for building a prototype, the one that I'm most interested in, is for informing development. Your prototype is going to be kind of a jerry-rigged version of what you would like to spend more time and resources building in the development stage. And if you are looking to hire developers to help you build it, it's going to be much easier for you to communicate your idea and what your product is supposed to do if you have a version of it already that you've spent time working on, you've tested, you kind of know what's supposed to happen. Without that, the process of understanding an idea is kind of difficult. And so really the whole point of this idea stage and why you should spend so much time here before you move on to the next stage, the development stage, is that you want to avoid wasting time, wasting money, wasting valuable resources building software that nobody's going to use because it's depressing. Most people who approach me for help with building their app really haven't spent enough time in this stage. And this is not my area of expertise, but luckily there's lots of resources out there to help you with this, like accelerator programs. We have one in town locally called Starter Studio. It's a 3-month program that will help you develop your idea, help you acquire customers. There's also other business mentors. There's a place called Score, where they provide business mentorship. And so at this stage, building yourself a mentorship Voltron, finding people that you can kind of talk to through this process is going to help you be successful. So that you can confidently move into stage 2. And stage 2 is the development stage. So now that you have a solid business plan, you have customers waving dollars at you saying, hey, when's it going to be ready? I need this now. We're ready to talk about how to make your idea a reality. And this is quite a scary stage, especially if you're not a technical founder. And it involves a whole lot more than code. And we can break the development stage up into 3 parts. There's the design stage. There's the development part, which is really kind of implementing your design. And then there is the deployment part. And this is taking what you've built, packaging it up to release it. And so we're going to dig into each of these parts, starting with design. And I've come to think of design more like planning and more like organization, because good designs are really well-organized designs. And it's more than just visual. The design part of the development process is really where we define exactly how things are going to work, how they're going to look. and what we're going to build. So the main question you need to ask yourself at the beginning of the development process is, what are we building? It's a pretty basic question, but it's not quite as easy to answer as you might think. So you need to define it very specifically. Nothing should be approximated. And this is one of my favorite parts, taking these big grand ideas that we have and distilling them into absolutes, because we just can't code up maybes. So the less definition you have when you enter the development part, the more unknowns you have when you get into development, the more room for error you're leaving, and so the higher risk you're in of wasting your precious time and money. So assuming that you've built a strong prototype in the previous stage, you've really made a lot of good progress already. And if you haven't, you should do that. And so the other thing to know about design is that you're not going to want to just hire a designer and send them off into a dark room and have them start creating screens. We have a lot of technical decisions to make first that are going to influence those designs. So let's dig into that. So what are the decisions that we need to make? One of the first decisions we have to make is, what platform are we building for? Is this app going to be used on a smartphone, on a computer? Some applications are just things that people are going to want a lot of screen space for. Some applications are used on the go, and so someone's going to want to pull it up on their mobile phone. Then there are some applications that don't have any visual parts. Think of applications that you talk to. We call that a conversational interface. So think about the platforms, and what I mean by that is, what devices or software are your users going to use to get to your application? Once you've thought about the platforms you might be building for, you need to think about the features of the application. A lot of that should be defined by your prototype, but things like, does the user need a profile? Do they need to log into an account? Do they need to post messages? Do they need to communicate with other users? And if they're communicating with other users, exactly how is that working? How real time is it? Is a delay okay? Really just defining all these parameters. And once you get your features figured out, then we start thinking about what the actual screens are and how users progress from one screen to the next. And we want to account for every screen. And then what data? So what data from the user do we need to collect? What data do we need to deliver? And so the other thing to know about platforms is the platforms that you choose to develop for are going to influence the kinds of developers you're going to need to hire. Every platform is a specific technology, and usually they have their own unique programming language, and therefore developers who specialize in that. And so you're going to want to start by talking with a lot of developers that specialize in a lot of different things, and tell them what you're trying to do and see what they have to say, because you're not going to meet a software developer who knows everything about everything. You're going to have to really take your time with the hiring process, because not only do you need to find expertise, you need to build trust. And so when it comes to communicating your ideas to the team that you're building to help you launch your application, and deciding what you're going to build and in what order, one very important rule to keep in mind is to keep your scope very small. And your scope is really the size of the feature that you're taking on at any given moment. So you need to be able to balance the dream, the ideal of what your app is going to eventually be, and what you can reasonably manage right now. There will always be a discrepancy in what it is now and the potential for what it could become. And so that's fine. And it's just something we need to embrace. Keeping your scope small also helps you put quality before quantity. If you build 5 features and they all kind of sort of work, or if they're not communicated properly, or it's overwhelming to the user, it's not going to be helpful. Whereas if you build one thing very well, and then shortly after that you release another thing that works very well, you're going to have more engaged users. And you're also going to be able to release a lot faster. The time it takes to build 10 things might be this long, but you can build and release one thing and get it out the door a lot sooner. A small scope also helps you to reduce uncertainty. As we said, the more uncertainty you have, probably the more resources you're going to spend resolving that uncertainty at some point. And I've observed that most founders have a difficult time exercising the restraint that's needed to kind of keep it to one thing at a time. I think it's something that is just, if you have difficulty with this, you're in good company. I as well have difficulty saying, no, we shouldn't build that right now, let's focus on this. But I consistently learn the hard way that if we would have just kept it small, we could have gotten this thing out the door, now we've missed a deadline. So the smaller the better, so that you can launch better products sooner. And so in order to properly define what we're trying to build, we kind of need to have a basic understanding of the component parts of an application. So really quickly, let's take a look at what an app is. It's really just this simple. You have a front end, which is the part that your users directly interact with. So these could be buttons on a screen. This could be a conversation. And then you have the back end, which is where any user data is stored. Your back end is going to be your server, which serves up your web pages, or if it's not a web app, then it's going to serve up data to the front end. And so your users are interacting with your front end. They are never interacting with your back end, but the back end talks to the front end. And so this means we're going to need to know, do we need to store data? Do we need a back-end developer? Do we need a screen? Do we need a front-end developer? Do we need a designer? And probably one of the next most challenging parts of getting your team together and working is how do you logistically move between design and development and then to deployment. In software development, we use what are called sprints, and they're usually some defined time period. The shorter, the better. This aligns with the smaller the scope, the better. And so I have done sprints that range from 1 week, really being the smallest sprint I've ever done. So at the beginning of the week, what are we going to do? At the end of the week, did we complete what we needed to do, and are we still on track? So quick feedback cycles to make sure you don't go and spend a month doing the wrong thing. If you spend a week doing the wrong thing, you can adjust, and you can be agile, and so that's where agile development comes from. And so if you're in a rush, week-long sprints are good. If you're not in a rush, I think developers tend to be more comfortable with 2-week sprints. I've done month-long sprints, but we always end up saying, we need more frequent communication and reviews. So once you have designed your application, what screens, how the system is going to operate, then you develop to those specs. And once you get something that's working, then you deploy it. And so deployment is, it involves taking the code that your developers use to write the application, and oftentimes it means packaging that up or compiling it into basically a translated version of your code that can then be sent to the App Store or sent up to a server so that the world can now access it. And so one thing that you should expect if you're going to be developing software is to have a development team that understands server environments. I am used to having the production environment. So this is the live server, the live application that people interact with. We have a staging environment. This is where we can deploy a pretty much done version of something that we've developed so we can test it, but maybe we might find bugs, so let's not push it out. Let's do all of our testing here. And then there's development, and this is where the coders are mostly doing their work and testing. So you work locally on your computer, you push your code up to development to make sure it's working with some development database. Once that's good, then you push it to staging. You have your founder or your stakeholders test it there. If they approve, then you push it out to production. And so everything kind of goes in that order. And so then that brings us to the exciting stage, which is we have working code and a beautiful design, and we are ready to deliver it. And so this is where your journey ends. Your app is done, and now all you have to do is sit back and collect profits. But I'm just kidding, because that's not true at all. So launching an app is really a marketing strategy. It's where you make a big to-do online and on social media, and you tell everyone, we have this new amazing thing, come and check it out. But from a development standpoint, you need to be releasing your software before you're ready to launch and tell the world about it. Early releases are done for technical reasons. It's so that you can get your software in front of customers as early as possible. I'm always telling the people that I'm working with, no, we need to get this in front of customers sooner than later. And by that I mean before you've built the technology to accept their payments. So yes, we've defined a minimum viable product, but we're building a complicated system that requires user interactions and it needs to work. So we need to release it even to a small group of people and test it and make sure it works before we go and tell the whole world about it. And I find that the founders who are comfortable with that end up being more successful. User feedback is gold. It consistently proves that you spent way too much time nitpicking your UI before you showed it to anyone. I've had this experience. It's very frustrating. You are building a very beautiful user interface that you based on early user feedback, but now you've kind of been spending some time with it, showing it to the rest of the team. You've all put in your input. You want to change things, you want to tweak them, and now you have this end result and you're ready to show it to your customers for the first time. We did that with an application and realized that we needed to change everything. The user did not understand it the way that we do on the inside. And so all of these decisions that we spent a lot of time making were completely worthless. And then the other thing to know is that negative feedback is really the only valuable feedback. I have worked on a lot of projects, and I will say most of the projects that I work on do not launch really as early as they should. And I think there's this fear of negative feedback. Prior to launch, there's all of this opportunity for success and that your app's going to be viral. Once you launch, the reality is probably that it's going to take some work to get it out there. So don't let that scare you. Your app is going to have bugs. That's okay. If you wait to release software until it's bug-free, you're never going to launch. So really look at negative feedback as your fuel because, you know, we're all smart people, but really you have to understand and believe that you don't know what the right thing is to do until your customers tell you. So that's why I say negative feedback is really the only valuable feedback. And then finally, there really is no such thing as done. The destination that we're trying to get to actually looks like this. And so you can see here that we've got our design part, we've got our development part, we've got our deployment part. The next part is listening to user feedback. And really, it's in the top right corner because this is actually the first thing you should be doing. Because you should never be designing solutions that no one's asking for. Because you might build it and release it and then get feedback that, oh, I don't use that. So you should always start with feedback and then design a solution for it, build it quickly, get it out there, and then get new feedback. So back to our original question. How do we get from a great idea to launching that idea to the world? Well, remember these key takeaways. Spend time before you enter the development stage to really hone your idea so that you avoid wasting time and money building something that nobody wants. 2, when you get to the point where you're planning what you're going to build, keep your scope as small as possible. And then release before you're ready to launch so you can get valuable user feedback before you go and make a big to-do about it. And then remember that there's no such thing as done. And that's great, because if there was, that sort of means that your business is over. So as long as you can keep doing this, you're in good shape. And the first time it's scary, but you're not just going to launch one time, right? You're going to keep building features, and you're going to launch those features. And you're going to do it so often, because you're going to keep a small scope, and you're going to get rapid user feedback, that after a couple times of releasing new features, you're going to get really good at releasing software. And that's awesome, because you'll be continually providing value for your customers, and that's really the reason why I love software development and product development. It's super rewarding, and so don't be afraid of the technical side of things. It's only scary because you haven't done it yet, but there's plenty of opportunities to repeat it. And so have fun, embrace the unknown, embrace the negative feedback, and use that as fuel to drive your problem-solving process.